Hi everyone. I'm John, and I'm a real alcoholic.
Hey, John.
I want to thank Henry for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to be here with you guys this weekend. I've over the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of meetings on Zoom, and Bob kind of talked about it a little bit. Zoom have saved us, you know, but Zoom to me is not Alcoholic Anonymous. There's something happen when I'm in a room like this with you. Zoom don't create that for me. And I'll be so glad when we get back where we can hang out together and have all that good fun that we used to have. And I'll tell you what it is. It's the hugs and the smiles, right? I'm nervous. And it's not because I never did this before. I'm always nervous when I get ready to speak, and my sponsor told me if I ever lose that, then it wouldn't be no longer God using me, that my ego would be took over. I want to talk a little bit about my morning reading. I read a Daily Bread. That's my choice of literature in the morning time. I've done that for 24 years. I've even subscribed to it, and I kicked my day off that way. And one morning I was reading my Daily Bread, and they were talking about two guys that was really good speakers. And they was getting those guys to speak. And the guy that could speak the best, he got up and he gave a really good talk, and the crowd gave him a standing ovation. But the other guy could speak good, but he was a nervous guy, kind of like me. And they told him, well, it's your time to speak. And he said, oh, no, I'm not going out there. And they said, yes, you are. And they pushed him out there. And he asked the crowd, do you know what I'm going to say? And they said, no. He said, good, you don't need to know. And he took off. And then they got him and pushed him out there again. And he said, do y'all know what I'm going to say? And they said, yes. He said, good, I don't need to say it. And the guy took off again. So the crowd got together, and one half of the room said, we'll say yes. And the other half of the room said, we'll say no. And so when he got out there, he said, do y'all know what I'm going to say? And one half said yes. The other half said no. He said, for those that know, tell the ones that don't know. And the guy took off again. And I'm saying, I'm reading that, and I'm saying, this is kind of like Alcoholic Anonymous. For the ones that know the message, please carry it to the ones that don't know. Again, I got to hear Bob tell a great story last night. And this story somewhat changed my perception of alcoholism and helped me with knowing that I was alcoholic. And I told myself a long time ago that I wasn't giving Bob credit for the story anymore, but it wouldn't make sense for me to take the story from him. When he shared that story, it changed my life. When I first came into Alcoholic Anonymous, my sponsor was a taper. And my sponsor took me to a lot of conventions. And I love speaker meetings. And I love being at conventions, and the reason why I love that so much is because I know that I'm not going to be able to say anything, so I don't have to try to top what Henry said, right? So I can shut my mind down, and when I can shut my mind down, my ears fly wide open, and I can hear the speaker, and I can receive better at a speaker meeting. One night, Bob was telling a story about some scientists, and they had these rats, and they hooked the electrodes up to the pleasure center of the rat's brain to get high spot. And they put a pedal in the cage. And they put the rat in the cage, and he hit the pedal, and he realized he can get the juice. So the rat laid on the pedal. And then they thought, well, we'll put Miss Rat in. He'll definitely stop for her. And I bet she was pretty, too. And he looked at Miss Rat like she didn't even exist. Now, this is my version of the story. And they gave him some cheese. And I'm quite sure it was gourmet cheese. And the rat wouldn't even stop to eat. And they say he got to be dehydrated by now. We'll give him some water. And the rat wouldn't even stop to drink. The rat laid on the pedal until he died. And they decided to do it again. But this time before the rat died, they was going to cut the juice off. So they put another rat in, hooked the electrodes up to the pleasure center of the rat's brain. He hit the pedal, realized he could get the juice. He wouldn't stop for Miss Rat. He wouldn't stop to eat the cheese. He wouldn't even stop to drink. The rat laid on the pedal. The rat went over and hit the pedal, and they had cut the juice off. The rat hit the pedal again and realized that he couldn't get the juice. He went over to the corner, and balled up in a fetal position to die. And I bet you this is what that rat thought. Without the juice, what's the use? And I'm sitting there listening at that story. And I'm saying, I'm that rat. Because April the 18th of 1998, I laid in Brevard County Jail, in a jail cell, in a bed, in a fetal position, wishing that the end would come, kind of like in a vision for you. I realized that I couldn't live with it, and I couldn't live without it. And I had all of me that I could stand. You know, when I first got out of prison, I'm going to talk about prison a lot. And it's because I was doing life in prison on an installment plan. I got to come home on vacation. Prison had became my home, right? And I had got out of prison, and I had got a sponsor. And I was over to my sponsor house, and one afternoon we was watching the news. And they had gave a guy a tiger to deliver to Vieira Zoo. And the tiger had got a hold of the guy's hand and almost ripped his hand off. And I'm willing to bet anybody in here, they don't give you a tiger without a set of instructions. Right? And I'm willing to bet anybody in here, one of the instructions was keep your hand clear of the cage. But the guy consumed alcohol on the way to the zoo. And he thought it was a good idea to stick his hand in that cage with that tiger. And I'm sitting there listening at the news, and I'm saying, I'm that guy. How many times have I had my hand in the tiger's mouth? I remember one time they were going to send me to prison for 5 years. And they let me out. And they said, John, all you got to do tomorrow is go do a clean urinalysis for your PSI. And you don't have to go to prison. I guess y'all know that drink thing hit me in the middle of the night, and my family seen me 5 years later. My sobriety date is April the 18th of 1998. I'm a member of the Central Group of Orlando. If you're ever in Orlando and you want to have a meeting with some real alcoholics, we sit right off of I-4, right on the corner of Broadway and Colonial. And stop in there and you can have a good meeting with some real alcoholics. When I first got out of prison, I hadn't connect back with my family. And I told my sponsor, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's Christmas time and I haven't connect back with my family. He said, well, John, you got plenty family over at Central. We'll go there on Christmas morning. So I spent my first Christmas sober at the Central Group and not with family. So my sponsor picked me up that morning and we went over to Central. And man, I could smell the aroma from that food, and seemed like that meeting wasn't going to never end. And sure enough, it came to an end around 12 o'clock, and we went in the kitchen and we began to fix plates. And I got me some ham. You know how those AA spreads are, right? That's something Christmas and Thanksgiving. And I got me some ham and turkey and macaroni and cheese. See, that was an upgrade in my eating. They don't feed you like that in DOC. And so I turned to my sponsor. And I said, well, who do I pay for this? He said, John, you don't have to pay for this. This is for free. See, that was new to me. Where I had came from, nothing was for free. Everything had a price tag on it. And I used to go to a lot of meetings with my sponsor, and this is the way he would introduce me to people. Meet John, he one of them bad kind of alcoholics. And I said, man, this guy gonna have everybody thinking I'm the worst guy in the world. And then I heard some of y'all's stories. And I said, now these some bad alcoholics. You know, I'm an alcoholic of a hopeless variety. And the reason why I say I'm an alcoholic of a hopeless variety, my family told me so. My friends told me so. Brevard County Sheriff Department told me so. The Department of Corrections told me so. Even the statistics was against me. The statistics say that 90% of the men get out of prison return within the first year. But since I've been in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I hadn't had the obsession to commit the type of crimes that land me in prison. It's been 23 years since I had to jump a fence. You know, being an alcoholic of a hopeless variety, you have some pretty hopeless things to happen. And I remember I still had an automobile, but I didn't have driver license anymore. And I stayed about 6 blocks from the store. And I remember thinking, there ain't no way the police gonna get me before I can get to the store and back home. And I got in the car, and I must have went about 2 blocks, and the blue lights came on. And I knew my brother's date of birth and social security number. So he came up to the car, and he asked me, did I have a driver license? I said, no, sir. He said, do you have an ID? I said, no, sir. He said, what's your name, date of birth, and social security number? So I instantly became Larcel Hunter. I gave him my brother's information. He went back to the car to run it. He came back, and he tapped on the car window, and he said, Mr. Hunter, would you step out? And I stepped out the car, and he began to put handcuffs on me. And I asked him, what are you doing? He said, you're $18,000 behind in child support. I mean, you can't make this kind of stuff up. I want to talk to y'all a little bit about my childhood and my past. I'm not going to tell you my childhood and my past made me an alcoholic. Usually you have to drink a little whiskey to become an alcoholic. But when I got the whiskey, it sure did help me with my childhood and my past. I was born in a little town called Statesboro, Georgia. My father was a sharecropper. My mother was a Southern Baptist. My mother taught me everything any good mother would teach her child. My mom made me go to Sunday school on Sunday mornings. My mom made me go to church. My mom made me go to Bible study during the week. My mom even sat me down and taught me the golden rules. She told me, baby, if you're going to make it in this world, you're going to have to learn to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But about the age of 9, all of that passed away when my mom died. My father was a chronic alcoholic. There was times I went to school on a wet, cold ground with holes in the bottom of my shoes. There was times I went to bed hungry at night. There was times I went to school and my clothes wasn't real good and kids made fun of me. So low self-esteem set in instantly. There was times I would try to do stuff to get the teacher's approval, and that didn't even work. I had older sisters and brothers, and I just knew if I made it to their home that everything would be all right. And I would get to their homes just to be put down even more. So I felt less than everybody and everything at a really young age. I remember sitting in my house, and I could hear my father come up in his car, and his car horn would be blowing. And I knew it was my dad out there drunk again. And I always had a decision to make. Was I going to go out and help my dad and be embarrassed in front of my friends? Or was I just going to leave him out there? And my decision was always this, that I was going to help my father no matter what. And I would go out to help my father. And I would hear my friends say, look at John, he got to drag his drunk dad in the house again. And I felt that those kids had a better life than me because I never seen them drag their father. I remember I'd be in my bedroom and I'd be looking out my bedroom window and kids would be out in the yard playing catch ball with their fathers or wrestling around in the yard with their father. And I would instantly blame God. And I would think what kind of God would take a 9-year-old boy's mother. But standing at this podium tonight, I have to let God off the hook because God left me with a father that wasn't willing to step up to the plate. I got interested in girls. What do you do? About the age of 14, I got really interested in girls. And what do? You go to those little teen centers. And I get over to that teen center, and I open the door to that teen center, man, and some of them would have on dresses, and, man, they would be looking pretty. And some of them would have on jeans, and I could smell that perfume. And I said, man, I'm going to dance with me some of these girls tonight. And I get in there, and one song would come on and go off, and I couldn't get off that wall to save my life. And I look out across the floor, and there'll be some guy out there with a pair of Chuck Taylors and Levi's on. Some of y'all know about Chuck Taylors and Levi's. That's old school. And I think to myself, it got to be in the Chuck Taylors and Levi's. And I'd go back and work and save my money up. And I'd buy me some Chuck Taylors and Levi's, and I'd be back off to the dance. How many of y'all know I was a guy standing up against the wall with a pair of Chuck Taylors and Levi's on? There was something on the inside of me that would not let me respond to things on the outside. And my father came up with the idea that I needed to go to Georgia and spend some time with my aunt and uncle one summer. And when I got to Georgia, I had 2 cousins that was maybe 4 or 5 years older than me. And they asked me one Saturday night, do you want to go to the dance with us? And I said, yeah, man, I'd like that. And they took me with them. And on the way to the dance, they stopped at this house. and they went and knocked on the door, and they took me up with him, and an elderly man came to the door, and they asked him, will he sell them a pint of moonshine? And he came back with a pint of moonshine and an MD 2020 ball. If any of y'all know about bootlegging, you know that combination. We got back in the truck. One of the brothers took a swallow and passed it to me. I said, I don't want that. And the other brother took a drink, and we went on to the dance. When we got to the dance, the other brother took a swallow, and he passed it to me. I said, I don't want that. He said, man, take a drink of this. It'll make you feel good. And I took a big swallow, man. I can remember it just like it was yesterday. Dr. Silkworth said, you shall remember. Guess what? I love carrot cake, but I don't remember my first slice. But I remember that first drink. There was a warm, burning feeling that went down on the inside of me. And when it hit the pits of my stomach, felt like my stomach expanded. Felt like my head exploded. Felt like I was 10 feet tall, bulletproof, and instantly good looking. Remember I said I was shy about dancing with girls? I danced with all on that night, man. I had it going on. There was no low self-esteem that night. Alcohol allowed me to visit from a place from which I had never been able to visit from before. For many, many years, alcohol was not my problem. Alcohol was my answer. And then my answer turned on me. And I didn't get another answer until I made it here to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got home that summer, some of my friends had been doing a little drinking too. And we would get together and we would put our money together and we would buy alcohol and some other little things. Now, I'm going to talk about drugs a time or two in my talk. And please don't judge me and say that I belong in Narcotics Anonymous. No, I'm an alcoholic and I'm at home. Right now, if you put a pile of crack on this podium, I'll call the police on you. You give me a drink of whiskey, I'll fight you about that pile of crack all night long. When I drink whiskey, I become open to everything. I used to wear a leather jacket, and I could put 3/5 of MD 2020 in the back of that jacket, and you'll never know it. So right away, I began to steal the drink. How many of y'all know you can't stay in school long drinking MD 2020? It wasn't long before I was expelled. And my father and sister say, you know what, you need some type of education, dude. You should go to Job Corps. I agreed with them. I went to Job Corps, and I did good in Job Corps for about 2 weeks. And I met up with the same crew I had been hanging up with. They just was in a different location. And there was a guy there. Me and him went out one Friday night on something called a Liberty trip. They get us all on a bus and took us over to Knoxville. On the way over there, me and him was sitting together. We had been talking about drinking. He said, John, this bus will ride a half a gallon of liquor. I said, man, quit playing. He said, John, you know I don't play. When we got to Knoxville, we got a half a gallon of Bacardi rum. There was a tire flipped up under that bus. We put that half a gallon of rum in that tire. When we got back on the Job Corps Center, that rum was there, man. After a few trips like that, they were sending me home from Job Corps. But on my way home, I had made my mind up that I was going to live the way I wanted to live. See, I wasn't afraid of my father anymore. I wasn't afraid of my sisters and brothers anymore. Alcohol had gave me all the courage I needed. And I felt like I was ready for the world. When I got home, I began to hang with the drug dealers. I began to sell drugs. I was able to buy a few toys. I was able to dress the way I wanted to dress. Most of all, I was able to drink the way I wanted to drink. Tom Collins, Scotch Collins, Hennessy, Ballantine. My story is different from a lot of people's stories. A lot of people say alcohol quit working for them. That ain't my experience. My last drink was just like my first one. I just got tired of the consequences. Somewhere in life, I crossed the invisible line, a place of no return. They began to put me in jail for periods of time. And I'd get to jail and my head would clear up and I'd say, you know, when I get out of jail, I'm going to get me a job, I'm going to get me a car, I'm going to get me a girlfriend, I'm not hanging with the same people anymore. I'm going to do the right thing. And the day would come, they let me out of jail. And I get about a mile from that bus stop, and the disease will begin to speak to me. And it always sounds like this. You just need one beer to take the edge off. How can one beer hurt? And I get off that bus with the mindset of just having one. And I'd be off and running to the next time. There was times they would put me in prison for periods of time. And when I would get to prison, I always write my family and tell them I found religion. I walk after the things of God now. And my family would believe me. Guess what? I believed me. If they'd have gave me a lie detector test, I would have passed because I meant business. The only problem is that when they released me from prison, they always released the disease of alcoholism too. And sometimes it would be 2 or 3 weeks before my family would see me. And when my family would finally see me, they say, you know, you're the biggest liar we know. But what my family didn't know, that I was doing the best that the disease of alcoholism would allow me to do. There were times my appearance began to fail. And my family would come on the street corner, and I look in that car at them, and I could see all that shame and pain in their faces. And they said, why don't you just come go home with us? If it ain't but for one day, please give yourself a break. Come go home with us. And I said, okay, I'll go home with you. And I get in that car and I look in that rearview mirror, man, and I can see that pain in their faces. How many of y'all know what pitiful and comprehensive demoralization feel like when you're hurting the people you love? And I said, man, I can't keep hurting them like this. And they stop and buy me some clothes and take me to their home. Allow me to have a warm shower. Give me a hot meal to eat. A clean bed to sleep in. And I walk around there 2 or 3 days and I said, man, I ain't hurting them like this no more. That's it. After about 3 days, I began to get irritable and discontent, and I needed a drink. Somebody know what I'm talking about. I didn't say I wanted a drink. I needed a drink. And my mind would begin to scream. And I knew if I got me a drink of alcohol, I'd be all right. And I go up to the corner store with the mindset of getting me a drink of alcohol, and I'd be off and running until the next time. I met this woman in Melbourne, and she told me, it's Melbourne got you drinking and drugging the way you drinking and drugging. Why don't you move to Atlanta with me? And I agreed. And her parents helped us get an apartment in Atlanta. Her stepfather helped me get a job. Her mother helped her get a job. We going to Atlanta, new beginnings, man. How many of y'all know the geographic cure don't work? Within a short period of time, I had destroyed everything that those people tried to help me do. But when I was in Atlanta, I worked at a store called Video Ingram. And I met this guy, and me and him became really good friends. And he had a little toy poodle that was bad about chewing electrical cords. And one night, he forgot to unplug a lamp. And that poodle got hold of that lamp cord. And he said, you could hear him all over the house. I said, yeah. He said, nah, John, when I go home, I wave it at him. And I said, what do we do? He said, man, that dog holler all over again. You know, that poodle had more sense than me. That poodle didn't want no more of the thing that had hurt him. Guess what? That poodle never had the obsession to chew another electrical cord. But you take me. Alcohol could beat me up one side, tear me down the other side, put more space between me and my family than there ever been, caused me to lose the best relationship I ever had, put me deeper in prison than I ever been. And the day they let me out, you wave a ball at me, I'll do it again. I have no mental defense against the first drink. Getting close to the end of my drinking, my sister came up on the street corner with the insurance policy. And she said, I need you to sign this insurance policy. The way you're living out here, I need something to bury you with. My sister had heard about when the drug dealers would be making a drug deal, I would run up and snatch the customer's money or jewelry and run with it. I was fast. They couldn't catch me. Believe it or not, I used to weigh about 151 to 160. I was really thin. And sometimes the drug dealers would see me coming. They said, man, give him something to get him off the corner. He's bad for business. You're in a world of trouble when drug dealers don't even want you around. I can remember walking late at night, feeling all the guilt, the shame, and the pain. Sometimes I'd have a bottle of booze. I'd have money in my pocket, and I have the other little things that I like to go along with my booze. But I began to say a prayer, and I began to ask God if I was going to ever change, that he was going to have to help me change. And about 3 weeks into that prayer, my family house was surrounded by Brevard County Sheriff Department. And that morning I met a power greater than myself. Be careful what you pray for. It was about 8 or 9 o'clock that morning, and they was dragging me out my family house, and all the neighbors was in the yard. And I looked back at my family, and once again, I got to see that shame and pain, pitiful, incomprehensive demoralization. On my way to jail, family standing there hurt, all the neighbors out looking at me and them. I got in the back of that police car, and I was trying to tell my family out the window that I love them. April the 18th of 1998, I thought it was the end for me. I had no idea that it was the beginning of a brand new life. They took me to jail, and I stayed in jail about 60 days, and a public defender came to see me. And he said, Mr. Hunter, they got you to the right this time. And this is what they're asking. They want 30 years on each charge running consecutive. They want 60 years. And the public defender got up to walk off, and I tried to call him back, and he shrugged his shoulders at me like, Mr. Hunter, the video is clear. There ain't much I can do to help you. They took me to court about another 30 or 60 days, and I was in the holding cell. And the state attorney and the public defender came out the courtroom door at the same time. And I'm saying, man, have this guy butted up with the state attorney on me? And when they got over to my cell, instead of my public defender talking to me, the state attorney bent over and opened the chute. And he said, Mr. Hunter, I got you to the right this time. This is what I'm willing to do. If you plea out the 30 years, I run the other 30 years concurrent. And you only have to do 30 years in prison. And the state attorney got up and walked off. And then my public defender bent over to the chute and said, Mr. Hunter, I think it's a good deal. You ought to take it. I bent over to the chute and told him, you take it. How in the world 30 years a good deal? They took me in front of the judge. And the judge said, Mr. Hunter, how do you plea? I said, to the mercy of the court. The state attorney said, Your Honor, before you accept that plea, I want to show you something. The state attorney pulled up a television set and stuck a video in it. And it was me just like you're looking at me. And the judge said, Mr. Hunter, with your prior record and this video, I'll probably go along with the state. And I said, Your Honor, if I get this type of time today, you're going to have to give it to me. I won't accept it from the state. He hit the table, bam, get him out of here, recess. When I got in the holding cell, I got on my knees. And I asked God if I get 30 to 60 years to let it be his will and not theirs. An hour or so went by, and they took me back in front of the judge. He asked the public defender to approach the bench with the habitual papers. He did. He asked the state attorney to approach the bench with the habitual papers. He did. But the judge was flipping through his folder. And then he said, I can't find them. And the public defender said, Your Honor, would you state that a little clearer for the record? He said, I can't find them, but I'm going to give Mr. Hunter every day in the Department of Correction that I can give him by law. And by law, all he could give me was 5 years in the Department of Correction, followed by 4 years probation. If the habitual papers isn't in the judge's folder 30 days prior to sentencing a man, he can't sentence him as a habitual criminal. There's not a second guess in my mind why I'm here in Miami with you guys tonight. I'm here tonight because the loving God looked down upon me and showed grace and mercy. I told y'all about the video. If I got what I deserved, you'd have a different speaker tonight. I'd still be doing 30. When I got to prison, I said the same prayer for 4 years and 3 months. I used to be walking around looking up at that razor wire on that recreational yard. And I said, God, I'm not asking you to get me out of here. And I know you didn't make me to be caged up like a wild animal. God, what I'm asking you is when I get out of here, help me to be a blessing to my family and not a hindrance. After being in the Department of Correction for a little while, those of y'all that been to prison, you know what a classification officer is. Some of you been on probation. You know what that is. And I don't know why I told that woman the truth. I've never told anybody the truth about my alcoholism and drug addiction. I never told anybody the truth about it. But when she was classifying me in the Department of Correction, I told her the truth. And based upon the stuff that I told her, she seen that I needed some help. And they forced me into a tier program. For the ones that don't know what tier is a rehab in the Department of Corrections. They forced me on a tier program. That's where I was introduced to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a counselor by the name of Mr. Elkins. One morning, Mr. Elkins called me out in front of the group. He said, John, do you think you're powerless over alcohol and your life is unmanageable? I said, Mr. Elkins, why are you calling me out in front of the group? We've had plenty of one-on-ones. He said, I didn't call you out, convict. I asked you a question. And he said, approach my desk. When I approached Mr. Elkins' desk, he shoved a book in my hand. And he challenged me to read that book. When I got back on the compound, I began to read that book during count time. And I read about 3 or 4 pages, and it asked me a question. It asked me, had I ever been defeated by alcohol? And God gave me a moment of clarity. I can remember the times I promised to take my daughter to Disney, but the night before I drank and drugged all my money up. I can remember the times when I had my rent money, but I drank and drugged it up and I got evicted. I could remember the times when I used to like to fish, but due to drugs and alcohol, I didn't own a reeling rod or tackle anymore. I could remember the time when a woman and 2 little kids were living with me in an apartment, and we had the final notice on the light bill. And with everything in me, I was going to pay that light bill the next morning. But in the midst of the night, that drink thing hit me, and I just wanted one to take the edge off. Y'all know the rest of the story. The woman and the little kids had to live with me on the candlelight. The next day when I went back to the tier group, Mr. Elkins can see that something was troubling me. And he took me in a room away from everybody else. He took me in his office. And when he closed the door, I began to cry. And Mr. Elkins said, John, what's wrong? I said, Mr. Elkins, alcohol had became my master, and I was its slave. He said, John, I've been hearing it come from your mouth. He said, but this morning I hear it coming from your heart. Now you got a place to start. Mr. Elkins began to work the steps with me in a short form. Shortly after that, I was transferred to Tomoka Correctional Institution. When I got to Tomoka Correctional Institution, there was 2 guys from Alcoholics Anonymous by the name of Elmer and Andy used to bring a meeting in every week. If any of y'all do service work and take meetings in the prison and jails, please continue. Because I'm standing here because 2 guys from Alcoholics Anonymous for the last 2 years of my sentence brought me AA meetings in prison, and they had a program of attraction. And I fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous before I ever went to a meeting on the outside based upon what Elmer was telling me. I told Elmer everything about me. I didn't lie to Elmer. For some reason, I had got real truthful. I don't know where that came from. It had to be God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And Elmer told me, John, an alcoholic of your nature, if you don't plant your feet in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, as soon as you get out of prison, I guarantee you'll drink again. I had about 3 weeks left on my sentence, and I was out on side the road picking up paper, and a guy from my past came by, and he was driving one of those box trucks. I don't know, he was delivering something, and we made eye contact, and he put on brakes, and I'm like, man, go ahead, you're going to jam my day. And I mean, I only got a few weeks left. I don't want the guy to stop, but he stopped anyway. And he got out the truck, and he was coming. I said, man, go ahead on. But he kept walking, and I'm looking at the officer, and the officer didn't say anything. The officer let him get by as close as Henry is to me. And the officer told him to stop, and he said, Hunter, you can talk to him. And I said, what's up? He said, what's up with you? And I said, you see me? He said, what you going to do with yourself when you get out of here? I said, man, I want to do something different. And he asked the officer, could he give me his phone number? And the officer let him. And he said, man, I can hook you up to this treatment center. Call me when you get out. So when I got back to the prison, I called my sister, and my sister called him on a 3-way. And he gave me the address and everything. And I wrote the recovery house in Central Florida. And I asked them when I get out of prison, could I come there? And they said, yeah. So when I got out of prison, I went to the recovery house in Central Florida. So they let me make a phone call that night. And I called my family, and my family said, we thought you was getting out. And I said, I'm out. They said, where you at? I said, I signed myself up in a halfway house for another year. And they said, you know what? You the biggest fool we know. I mean, you've been locked up for 4 years and 3 months. Now you're going to lock your own self away for another year? But see, what my family couldn't see was my fear. It had been since the age of 14. I had been sober in society. And I wanted this thing, man. I was willing to go to any length. If they'd have told me I had to sign up for that recovery house for 2 years, I would have did it. I meant business. See, there's a part of me that loved that madness out there. And if I expose that part of me to that madness, I'll go out there and I'll stay. I'm the type of guy that has to do what's necessary in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in order to maintain his sobriety. While I was at that recovery house, there was a guy who used to bring a big book study every week. And one week, instead of doing the big book study, he told his story. And when he told his story, I heard my story. And at the end, I asked him, would he show me how to stay sober? He said, John, I can't show you how to stay sober, but I can show you what they showed me. Me and him sat out and talked about steps 1, 2, and 3. And he flipped his big book open to page 98. And it said, burn this idea into the conscience of every man, that he can get sober in spite of anyone under these conditions, that he trusts God and clean house. He said, John, I see that you trust God. Now it's time for you to clean house. He took me in his Jeep across the street, and he bought me a notebook, tablet, and an ink pen. He came back and sat at the table, and he drew some lines in that tablet. And he told me in the first column, he wanted me to write down the name of all the people I hate. The resentment list. And I'm thinking, man, this is some easy stuff. Don't you know I remember them too well? The next week he made it even easier. He told me he wanted me to write down in the second column, he wanted me to tell him why I hate him. The cause. Don't you know I remember what they did to me? But the third week he flipped the script on me. He told me he wanted me to pray for him. I said, what? He said, John, you got a mean business I don't want to be fooled up with you. I said, okay, I'll do anything you say. He said, I want you to pray for him. And I want you to ask God to give them whatever you would ask God for yourself. And I asked God to let the kids be college graduates, let the marriage be happy, give them the income they need to support their families. And some of them I couldn't pray for. And I told God, if you want me to love that one, then you love him through me so that this love can be made perfect. Then he came back in a couple more weeks. He said, how you doing with that praying? I said, I'm doing pretty good, all but 2 people. He said, what 2 people that is, John? I said, the girl who shot me in my back with that hunting rifle and caused me to lose my right lung. I can't get past that. And how can you even expect me to get past that? My father who treated me so poorly as a child, how can you expect me to get past that? And he said, John, sit down. And I sat down, and he told me, I want you to think of 3 of the worst things you ever did. And I sat there and I thought about them. And he said, John, do you think you should be forgiven? I said, yes. He said, John, I think you should be forgiven too. The reason why you did what you did was because you were spiritually sick. The reason why that girl and your father did the things they did to you was because they were spiritually sick. Here in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't hate spiritually sick people. We pray for them. That was good news to me that my father was spiritually sick. That meant that my father wasn't the type of man who would send me on a wet, cold ground with holes in the bottom of my shoes. That meant that my father wasn't the type of man that would abandon me in the midst of a crisis. That meant that my father wasn't the type of man that would send me to bed hungry at night. How can I hate a man like that when I became the same man? See, a resentment for me is like this. It's like me filling this bottle up with poison and drinking it, but waiting for you all to die. All those years I was dying on the inside, and nobody knew it but me. I like to listen to R&B and some gospel and a little country, but one morning I was listening to this R&B artist. She's from right here in Miami. Some of y'all may know her. Her name is Betty Wright. And Betty Wright made a song about no pain, no gain. And I was listening to it and it said, if you can receive the gift to forgive, a longer and a better life you'll live. And I said, wait a minute, that sounds like AA talk. I had heard that song. I had heard that song a lot. But that morning I heard that song. And I rewinded, and sure enough, she said again, if you can receive the gift to forgive, a longer and a better life you'll live. What are you saying to me? Are you saying to me that when I forgive somebody, that I get set free? See, when you hate a person, that's taking. When you pray for a person, that's giving. I've never seen anybody give spiritually and not receive. But the most powerful thing she said, if you can receive the gift to forgive. You mean I don't have the power to forgive? No, I don't have the power to forgive. Forgiveness comes from God through me when I become willing to set one of his kids free. What a deal we got here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I remember telling my sponsor everything in my fifth step. Y'all had told me half measures avail us nothing. I didn't know if he was going to call the police or not. But I knew that I didn't want to get drunk. I remember my sponsor asked me, he said, John, are you ready to have God to remove your character defects? And I said, yeah. He said, what are they? I said, huh? He said, but him being the fine sponsor that he was, when he was doing when I was giving him my fifth step, he was jotting down my character defects. He said, you're a liar, you're a thief, you're a deadbeat dad, and there were some other things that he wrote down. And he said, John, I believe the dirtiest, rottenest thing you ever did, you did it to survive based upon the circumstances that was in your life. He set me free. Everybody else told me I needed to burn in hell for my actions, and some of them tried to send me there. But you know, sometimes I jot with newcomers and old timers about their character defects. And I asked them, I said, well, how you doing with your character defects? And man, you'd be surprised how spiritual people are, because some of them say that they don't bother them at all. But that ain't my experience. I just got a set of spiritual tools to help keep the heads clipped off them. You know, I'm going to tell a story. Let's call this little boy Johnny. There was a little boy named Johnny that was good about fixing things. He fixed a lawnmower and painted it red and set it on side the road. That Sunday morning, old Baptist preacher coming through there. Baptist preacher said, Johnny, how much you want for that lawnmower? He said, $25. He said, will it run? He said, yes, sir, it'll run. And so the preacher walked over and began to jerk the string. He said, Johnny, I thought you said this thing a crank. He said, it will, but there's a trick to it. He said, Johnny, what's the trick? He said, you got to kick it, spit on it, and curse it. The preacher said, Johnny, you know I'm a minister. You know I don't curse. I probably couldn't even remember how to curse even if I wanted to. Johnny said, you jerk that string a few more times, it'll all come back. and see, that's the way my character defects are. If you jerk my string hard enough, you can get the real John Hunter. I remember I was sitting down and I was writing my amend list. And my sponsor asked me, he said, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm writing my amend list. He said, no, you're not. I said, what do you mean? He said, do you remember when we was doing the steps? And I asked you, was you selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate with any of those folks? I said, yeah. He said, that's your amend list. Now, if I knew he was going to use that for an amend list, I wouldn't have been selfish, dishonest, and inconsiderate with some of them. You know, it's easy to make an amend to who you want to make an amend to. And I didn't want to make an amend to my daughter's mother. She had took my parental rights for years. And that's the first one he made me do. And I said, man, you can't. He said, John, I want you to write him a letter. Maybe your daughter will see this letter. And I said, man, you can't make me do this. These people think I'm the scum of the earth. I'm the last person they want to hear from. You're going to make me open up a can of worms. He said, John, write the letter. I said, man, I don't want to. He said, John, listen, this ain't no longer about them. This is about you cleaning your side of the street so that you can be a maximum service to God and others. He said, write that letter. I wrote the letter. I went back to him. I said, man, you can't make me mail this letter. He said, John, let's pray over the letter. We prayed over the letter, then we mailed the letter. Within a week time, I got a phone call, and it was my daughter. And she told me that she wanted to be a part of my life, that she wanted to build a relationship with me. She's expensive, but she's back. What if I had not done the step work that was put in front of me? I remember I was in Melbourne, Florida, and I did a lot of dirt in Melbourne. And every now and then, even tomorrow on my way back, I'm going to stop in Melbourne and I'm going to ride through for a reality check. I like to do that every once in a while. One time I was riding through Melbourne and I was just for a reality check. I had forgot about this amend. And I got to this store and I remember, oh man, I owe this guy an amend. See what happened? I used to steal wine at that store. And the guy would sometimes catch me and I would threaten to fight him. So the guy barred me off. You know, God bless the child that stood me between me and that morning bottle of MD 2020. You can't stand between me and that. I had to have that at all costs. And so the guy finally barred me off the premises. And I said, man, I can't make no amend. And I got about 2 more blocks, and it became the strongest thing on my mind. And I turned the car around, and I went back to the store, and I said, God, if you want me to go in here, you're going to have to go with me. And I opened the door to that store, and the guy pointed at me with a smile on his face. And he said, you're a different man. And then he said it again. And I stepped in there, and I told him I was here to make things right with him. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. And I explained to him that I belonged to a fellowship. And one of the requirements was that I clean up the wreckage from my past. And he pointed at me with a smile on his face again. And this time calling me friend. He said, if you made it right with God, you've already made it right with me. See what this work does in our life when we're willing to do this work? I can't wait until at night to do step 10. Step 10, I have to do it all day. There's time, whenever I mess up, I clean it up right then. Upon awakening, I ask God to divorce me from self-pity, self-seeking, and dishonest motives. I ask God to give me intuitive thinking for the next 24 hours. And I always add somebody else in my prayer and my meditation. I remember when Kent started sponsoring me, it's somewhere like 6 or 7 years ago. Kent asked me, did I pray and meditate? And I told him, I pray. He said, do you meditate? I said, I pray. He said, that ain't what I asked you. Do you meditate? And he said, so I had to come clean, and I said, not really. And he told me that I need to start meditating. And I began to meditate. And this is what I found out about meditating. When I'm okay with God, I'm okay with you. It opened up a whole brand new channel in my life. You know, one time I called Kent, and the IRS wrote me a letter. And they said I owed them $38,000. Now, you ain't got no problem till you got IRS problems. I'm telling you, man, you can't even sleep with those type of problems. And I told Ken, I said, the IRS said I owe them $38,000. And Ken said, let's make it a piece of spiritual business. I said, what? So I told him again, I said, did you hear me? I said, the IRS said I owe them $38,000. So before I can get finished, he said, I heard you. Let's make this a piece of spiritual business. Pray and meditate about it and tell me what God do. That's my sponsor thing. Right now, if I call my sponsor with a problem, he don't try to answer the problem. He point me to the source. Let's make this a piece of spiritual business. I began to pray and meditate on that money I owe the IRS. And things began to get real clear of what I needed to do. So I went back and seen the lady that did my taxes, and I gave everything to her. And she redid it, and they owed me $1,900. And I'm saying, wow, what a powerful God. See, Ken always tell me that I don't got a 100 God, that I got a 1,000 God. And he always point out to me why. You know, I'm going to tell you how strong my God is. I don't got 100% God. I got 1,000% God. I'm going to tell you how powerful my God is. I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I put $1 in the basket and got a brand new life. You tell me that ain't a powerful God. Where else can we get that? We got the best deal on the block here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I do my 12-step. I do a lot of 12-step work around the recovery houses and stuff like that. And you know, the steps isn't designed to take away who we are. They're designed to take away who we're not. I always knew about the spiritual life, but what I didn't know about was the program of action. I knew there was a spiritual solution, but I didn't know about the program of action. My family used to take me to church. I ain't trying to preach to y'all, but I got to tell my story. My family used to take me to church, and they would do something called an altar call. And they would bring me up to the pulpit, and they would anoint me with oil, and they would pray over me. And I wanted what that guy had, because what he had looked a whole lot better than what I had. But when I leave church, I couldn't pass the ABC. I'm not saying that God couldn't meet me at that altar. I'm saying that my house wasn't in order to receive the things of God. The 12 steps said, having had a spiritual awakening as to what? The result of these steps. Passing the liquor store isn't a problem anymore after working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Michelangelo was standing in front of a church, chiseling on a big ugly stone. And a little old lady came up and said, son, why are you chiseling on this big ugly stone? He said, because on the inside of this stone, there stands a beautiful angel. And that's the same way the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is. Once the 12 steps take away everything that's ugly, here's a room full of beautiful angels. Where else can we get this deal at? You know, there's a light that centers the mind of every alcoholic, that he could one day safely drink again. And if we get away from doing the things we need to do in Alcoholics Anonymous, that light comes alive. I got a bad back, and some mornings I roll out of bed on my knees, and I say, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thy will. Relieve me from the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those that I may help. Of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life, may I do thy will always. What I'm asking God is to get me out of the way, so I can be a maximum service to him and his kids. In order for me to drink today, I have to drink off a lie. I couldn't drink off the truth to save my life. I can tell myself this and get good and drunk. John, you know you look pretty good. Your family's back on your team. You work real hard. And you got your decent automobile. You deserve a drink. But if I tell myself, John, when you open that beer, you're going to open the gates to the penitentiary. You're not going to have a job. You're not going to have an automobile because you're going to pawn it for drugs and alcohol. And you're going to be put deeper in prison than you've ever been. That's the truth about my drinking. I can't lie to myself about my drinking. I'm going to tell you how my drinking look. I get out of prison. I do good for a little while. I take a drink. I smoke some crack. I commit some crimes. I go back to jail. I go back to prison. I get out of prison. I do good for a little while. I take a drink. I smoke some crack. I commit some crimes. Back off to prison. I get out of prison. You get where I'm going with this. It's kind of like a dog chasing his tail. It don't change. How can I convince myself tonight that it'll be any different? See, I tried controlled drinking. It's that red look, I drink a little white. It's that white, I drink a little wine. The only way that I can have a normal life, I have to abandon the ideal that I can safely drink. It has to be smashed. I thought I was weak until I made it here to the rooms of alcoholic and got hold to the big book. And Bill said that most of us was unwilling to admit that we were alcoholics. And then he told us how we had to get this thing. He said we must concede in our innermost self that we are alcoholics. Best thing ever happened to me again. See, once I found out I had alcoholism, then you all could help me. You told me that I had to admit that I was powerless over alcohol and that my life was unmanageable. You told me that I had to make a decision to turn my life over to the will of God as I understood him. You told me that I had to get out of management. Based upon my management skills, if I worked for a big corporation, I'd have been fired a long time ago. You told me that he was the father and we are his children. He's the principal and we are his agents. You told me that that concept was the keystone to the new and triumph arch from which I could pass through to freedom. Then you made me a promise. You told me if I would stay close to God and perform his work well, that God would take care of me. And you didn't lie to me. See, I'm at a place in my recovery today where either God is or he ain't. He's everything or he's nothing. God's everything in my life. I walk by faith and not by sight. I'd rather walk alone with God in the dark than any man in the light. The family that said I was doomed, they argue about whose house I'm coming to for the holidays. I had a family member to die, and they called me and say, you need to get up here because we need some decisions made, and you're the most sane person in the family. I dropped the phone. Where did that come from? But you did that for me. You gave me my family back, and my family view me different. Society view me different. That was one of my biggest fears, that I wouldn't be accepted in society. I'm a 3-time loser. I'm a habitual criminal. How do I get the life that I got today? You tell me that my God isn't a 1,000 God. Not part of my life changed. My whole life changed. How do I get a good friend like Henry? And you other wonderful folks in here. Look here. Most of, you know what? Men and women of our creed you probably would, usually it don't mix. But we got one thing in common here. And we love on each other and we help each other. Sometime I be to my family house for those dinners, and I catch my family watching me. And I ask them, why are you watching me? They said, man, ain't nobody watching you. I said, come on, tell me, why are you watching me? And they said, man, how did you do it? And I tell them I'm like that old woodpecker. And they said, a woodpecker? I said, yeah, there was a woodpecker that got up religiously every morning. And he went and pecked on a hardwood tree trying to get the worms and mites out. One morning, that woodpecker went to peck on that tree, and a dark cloud formed over that tree. And a streak of lightning came out that cloud, and it split that tree. And the woodpecker was able to eat all the worms and mites that he wanted. And then a whole flock of woodpeckers joined him. One of the woodpeckers looked up at him and said, how did you do it? He said, I showed up and did what I was supposed to do, and God did the rest. See, there's nothing magical about this. I showed up to the Alcoholics Anonymous and did what I was asked to do, and God did the rest. Thank y'all so much.